We've got breaking news out of college football where Virginia Tech is hiring James Franklin as their next head coach. That's the latest from our very own Matt Zenitz. Franklin comes to Blacksburg by way of Penn State, where he was the head coach of the Nittany Lions for 12 years before being fired after a 3-3 start to the season. Franklin won nearly 70% of his games as the head coach in Happy Valley, leading Penn State, if you remember, to the college football playoff semifinals in 2024. Prior to that, he was the head coach at Vandy. Franklin will take over a Virginia Tech program that has tallied just one winning season since 2020 and hasn't reached the ACC title game since 2016. All right, let's welcome in our college football analyst, Brandon Marcello, here to break this all down. Really the first domino to fall in this coaching cycle here in college football. So, Brandon, what more can you tell us about how all of this went down and all of it came together? Because James Franklin's name was being floated around as a candidate for a lot of jobs that are out there in college football. He was, one of the bigger names.
Yeah, this is the one he'd been circling around the most and for the longest and had the deepest discussions with. People from his camp were inquiring about other jobs and even quizzing some people around some other programs, including Arkansas, about that job and what it would entail and what the NIL base was like and what kind of situation they were going to be in financially. But with Virginia Tech, they kind of had all their ducks in a row, so to speak. You remember when they made this decision to make a change a little over a month ago, they said, we're going to invest heavily into the athletics department. We're going to increase the budget by an average of $40 to $60 million each year. They took that to their Board of Regents, got that figured out and settled. And then they went aggressive into this coaching cycle. They talked to several candidates, including John Summerall, I'm told, at Tulane. But James Franklin was always priority number one for them. And it was just a matter of him kind of looking at the landscape, at the other jobs to see if something else would come open that might entice him more. But here over the last several days, especially last week, I should say, it became more zeroed in that James Franklin was going to take this job at Virginia Tech. And when Virginia Tech gave them that quote-unquote deadline over the weekend, it kind of pushed all their chips to the middle of the table and said, listen, we've been talking about this for a long time. You feel good in this situation. Let's make the move now so we can get a jump on this coaching cycle, because this is the first job to get filled. And now it allows Virginia Tech to move forward, start recruiting, so to speak, and start putting a staff in place while everybody else is either still trying to make a decision whether they're going to fire their coach and, of course, also still trying to search for a coach to hire.
Brandon, you mentioned it. This is the first job to get filled. So if we zoom out, look big picture here, what does this mean at this point for the rest of the coaching carousel? Because, of course, people were making the connection. Shane Beamer, maybe he's somebody that could take over for this job. Ultimately, that does not happen. And we have a lot of head coaching jobs to fill in college football in terms of the Power Four. So what does it mean for the rest of this list?
I think it does a couple things, right? Now, if they were talking about any other big jobs that involved James Franklin, I thought the one that was maybe most interesting was potentially Florida. But that was a situation that was not going to happen for several more weeks, depending on whether Florida can get obviously their top target and Lane Kiffin, because if they were not able to get him, they would start going down the list. And James Franklin was a hot name the last time the job came open at Florida. Several boosters there were enthralled with the idea of hiring him. But now that this is taken, that Virginia Tech is full, you're going to see a situation here where Bob Chesney, for example, at James Madison, where right now they've got a great chance to potentially reach the college football playoff. He's someone that was probably going to be considered the Virginia Tech job if Franklin didn't take it. But now his name's been heating up over the last week at UCLA, all the way across the country. So now this opens the path for UCLA to pursue him more, and for Bob Chesney, for that matter, to show more attention to that job. So what this does is, just like dominoes, as you see, this was the first one to fall, and it's going to affect someone else. And if I had to guess at this moment, an educated guess, that next one could potentially be UCLA if they were to go and target and make Bob Chesney their guy.
Okay, certainly a lot of spots to fill that we're going to be keeping an eye on. Back to James Franklin, because he was there, the head coach of Penn State for 12 years. And despite getting the Nittany Lions to the college football semifinals, in 2024, James Franklin showing up in the big moments was always a topic of conversation. There was always a lot of pressure on him in that job. Taking this job in Virginia Tech, maybe not the same sort of pressures, of course, that you have at Penn State, but what do you think his outlook is going to be there, being in a role where they haven't had a winning season since 2020?
You hit on it right there. It's going to be 6 years since they've been to a bowl game. So get Virginia Tech back to a bowl game. Obviously, they're going to have more resources. They're going to be more active in the transfer portal. They're going to be able to get a different class of athlete there. They're going to be a competitive program, one of the top 3 in the ACC. And if you're in that realm, you're going to have an opportunity to not only win the championship there in that conference, but obviously make the college football playoff. Now, that's probably not going to happen in year 1 or year 2, but it puts them in that position with the resources they have. But the one knock, of course, on James Franklin is his record against the elite. He's 1-18 against top 5 teams there when he was at Penn State. And that's really kind of what sunk him there from the get-go. Can he win top 10 games? Not top 5, but top 10 games, because the top tier programs in the ACC, a Miami, an SMU, or Clemson, should it bounce back in the next year or two, are going to be in the top 10. They're not going to be number 1 or number 2 or number 3 like the Michigans and Ohio States they've had to face year in and year out in the Big Ten. So this is, quote unquote, an easier job. It still has its own stressors, of course, but this is a situation that, much like maybe in a certain extent at Vanderbilt, where he was at more than a decade ago, if he can go in, get that thing back to a bowl game and build it up from there and get Virginia Tech back into competition as a top 15 program, and then maybe beat a top 10 team or two, you're going to have Virginia Tech in the playoffs. So this is a great spot. This hire just made a lot of sense, and why it's been rumored for several weeks that these two parties just made a lot of sense to attract each other. And now that it's final, I think Virginia Tech fans should be very excited, and I think they very much will be when they hear him speak at their press conference.
From a recruiting standpoint, Brandon, James Franklin has that experience recruiting in the DMV area from his time at Maryland. So how much is that going to help him bring some talent there to Blacksburg?
Yeah, that's the thing. Everybody talks about the sport being more national now, and certainly that you can recruit nationally at any job now, but it's still very much a regional sport. You got to start within your own state borders and then expand out from there. So he's very familiar with the area, as you just said. And in addition to, one, most of his career has been spent up in the Northeast from that matter. You mentioned Maryland. He was an assistant there a couple of different times. Obviously at Penn State for the last decade plus. This is just a situation that just felt right from the get-go, and he's going to be able to attract talent. What's really going to be fascinating to me is when the transfer portal opens, what kind of players does he target? And also, because that'll be more national-based, but also who will he hire as his offensive and defensive coordinators? You know, Penn State, they were throwing money around. They made Jim Knowles their defensive coordinator after he won a national championship at Ohio State, and he left there within a week to go be at Penn State, and of course that all failed there. He brought in Andy Kotelnicki as his offensive coordinator when he was setting the world on fire at Kansas and lifting that program back up to national relevancy. What does James Franklin have in store for his coordinators at Virginia Tech? That's going to very much determine whether this is a program that's going to try and be on the cutting edge offensively or defensively, or if it's going to be maybe more or less the same of what we're seeing at Penn State. Because the one knock on James Franklin at Penn State was his offense. Whoever he brought in, the offense just is what it is. They weren't explosive. They weren't throwing the ball down the field. Yes, Virginia Tech's a program. They always talk about bringing your lunch pail and your hard hat. That's always been their identity. But you do need to be more explosive in this day and age to be a threat to get into the college football playoff. So it's fascinating to me who he ends up hiring mostly as his offensive coordinator.
Brandon, we certainly appreciate it joining us for that breaking news here on HQ, where Virginia Tech is hiring James Franklin as their head coach. And of course, the James Franklin conversation continues. Our crew over on College Football Insiders will certainly break down this conversation from every angle. You can watch right now by scanning that QR code on your screen.
Breaking college football news, the first domino falls in the new coaching carousel as the Virginia Tech Hokies plan to hire James Franklin as their next head coach, according to our Matt Zenitz. Franklin, of course, coming by way of Penn State, where he was head coach there for 12 years. He won a lot, just didn't win the big ones. Well, a year ago, only a play or two from the national championship game. Let's bring in Chip Patterson and Tom Fornelli from the Cover 3 podcast. And this was a guy, Chip, I thought could have gotten another job in the Big Ten or maybe even the SEC. What does it mean to you that he decided to go ahead and jump into the ACC for really a second-tier ACC job?
Chris, two things. Number one, that he did his homework. And I think about the fact that Virginia Tech's last head coach is a former James Franklin defensive coordinator in Brent Pry. He certainly had a lot of time and a lot of conversations to get an idea, a lay of the land of what he would be walking into. I think it also affirms that financial commitment that Virginia Tech has talked about making in its football program to change a program that had championship expectations in the ACC, but was spending near the bottom of the conference. And so to James Franklin, that means you are getting a head coach who is used to having the kind of resources and putting them to good use. In the same way that James Franklin modernized Penn State, he can modernize Virginia Tech. I think that if James Franklin is saying yes to Virginia Tech, it means they have met all of his requests, and it means that Virginia Tech football is going to be in a much better place here in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think James Franklin taking this Virginia Tech job just reaffirms something I thought from meeting him a few times. It's that he's a very smart man. He knows what job he should be taking, because I think this Virginia Tech job is perfect for him. Chris, you mentioned the possibility of taking a Big Ten gig. If he couldn't win the Big Ten at Penn State, what school is he going to go to in the Big Ten where he feels like he's going to have a better shot to win that league than at Penn State? Meanwhile, he's going to Virginia Tech. And if we think back to how James Franklin got to where he is, it was by taking over at Vanderbilt and building a program from the rubble and turning it into a 9-win team, something that we had not seen. And now, obviously, Clark Lee is kind of doing the same thing with the Commodores. Then he went to Penn State and took over that program while it was still in the rubble, following the Joe Paterno and the Jerry Sandusky scandal that leveled that program for a few years. And he built it into the program that became the one where he was no longer good enough for it because he wasn't winning the big games. So now he's going to Virginia Tech, a program that's in the same footprint where he's had a ton of success recruiting for Penn State, where he's still going to be able to use all those connections, and he's taking a program that needs to be rebuilt, something he's done twice before. I think this is a great hire for Virginia Tech, and I think it's a great hire for James Franklin.
All right, let's get letter grades from both of you. Chip, what do you give Virginia Tech for getting the first domino to fall and getting their guy, James Franklin?
Anytime you get your guy, that's an A+. I mean, I got to think that there's no way that you're going to have a downside to this. They would love to be losing big stakes games, Chris. This is a program that has not been in the postseason since 2020, and at one time was the gold standard for consecutive seasons of getting to bowl games. No, with how far that program has fallen, they would love to be routinely in top 10 on top 10 games. So yeah, A+ for me.
I'm going to go A++ just to one-up Chip, because I do think that this is a fantastic hire for the Hokies. And I just think that overall, when you look at the entire picture, yes, he was the top target. Yes, they got him. And when you look at like the jobs that are available right now across the country, you know, Florida's open, LSU's open. For Virginia Tech to zero in on James Franklin and get this done while those other schools are kind of sitting around and waiting on other targets who aren't nearly as accomplished as James Franklin, grand slam hire for the Hokies.
You mentioned the LSU job, and that's one that's been in the news today because there are rumors / reports that LSU has Lane Kiffin's family on campus, giving him a tour of Baton Rouge. How quickly do you expect this thing to start moving now with the first domino to go, Tom?
I think it really depends on the context of the situation. I think some schools are still going to be moving at the same rate they have been. But if you're somebody like Florida or you're LSU and you're looking at Lane Kiffin's currently coaching an 11-1 Ole Miss team that will be in the college football playoff. Is he going to leave the team during the season to take your job while they're going to still be in the playoffs? Or is Ole Miss going to force him to leave if he doesn't make a decision soon? So I think it really depends on the gig. I think some of the jobs we could see filled within the next few weeks here, especially after the regular season wraps up. But I still think that for the bigger jobs who are waiting out the big fish, it's going to be about another 3 or 4 weeks before we see it start moving.
Okay, first in the non-Lane division, I think Arkansas, UCLA, some of those jobs we might see more movement on, especially as some of their targets wrap up their regular season. I do think it makes sense, if I am the Kiffins, to use the off week to go and check out where you might live. You're doing your research. This is all going to come down to Lane Kiffin making a decision, likely before the Egg Bowl. I understand why you're going to think about Florida and LSU and Ole Miss. I understand why, as an Ole Miss fan, you're frustrated. But I think that we'll know when the Egg Bowl starts what the future of all those parties involved are going to be.
Chip, what do you think this means for Shane Beamer and South Carolina?
Shane Beamer might be okay at South Carolina. Mike Norvell might be okay at Florida State. Places that might have zeroed in on James Franklin. Now all of a sudden you're starting to reconsider the math. You're starting to look around and maybe wait for some other dominoes to fall to see what the candidates list is. South Carolina could be frustrated, especially in the wake of blowing that lead to Texas A&M. But are emotions going to make the decisions, or are you going to make the financial commitment necessary to buy him out, bring someone else new in? Yeah, James Franklin off the market to Virginia Tech might actually cool some hot seats across the country.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say that this makes Shane Beamer safe at South Carolina, because I think what it really does is it just kind of eliminates an easy exit ramp for both parties, in which if Shane Beamer wanted to reset the clock, Virginia Tech obviously made a lot of sense for him, considering his father, is the one who built that program. So it made sense for him to, quote unquote, go home to take that gig. But I still don't know that South Carolina is exactly happy with Shane Beamer right now after they blew that lead against Texas A&M. So I don't know what exactly the future holds in Columbia, South Carolina with the Gamecocks, but we probably won't find out until after that Clemson game. I suggest Shane wins it.
I would say eyes to Auburn, too, as things are starting to wind down. Any of those other jobs where Franklin might have been there, potentially in the mix, he's gone. And so now it's we can sort of sharpen our focus on literally the same pool of candidates for a lot of these jobs. Ole Miss, as it does its research of who they would hire if Lane does end up taking Florida or the LSU job. So it'll be interesting to see who moves first to grab one of those qualified candidates.
Chip Patterson and Tom Fornelli with us here as James Franklin heads to Blacksburg to take over at Virginia Tech to replace Brent Pry, his former coordinator at Penn State. 8 other power conference jobs are still to be filled, and more could potentially open. You have several in the SEC and the Big Ten as well. Cover 3 podcast will keep you current on everything going on today upon further review, recapping the new AP poll that came out today, looking ahead to tomorrow's CFP poll, and 100% certain we'll be hearing a little something from the Cover 3 guys in podcast form on Virginia Tech hiring James Franklin.